This is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. Now, Burnley voted to leave the EU by a large margin. The town has a large ethnic minority population, and some we spoke to said they had experienced more racism since the Brexit vote. Sky's Michelle Clifford spoke to 4 women about their experiences since last June.
I think the community in Burnley especially has always been divided as long as I've been living here. But I think that the thing about Brexit is it's allowed the division to be spoken about more explicitly and in ways that are more divisive as well. So not in just a very comfortable way where we're talking about, oh, we're all segregated and divided, but actually it sometimes can be insulting, sometimes can be attacking, sometimes can be scapegoating.
Is that something that you have felt as well, that it kind of has legitimised maybe views that people kept a lid on before?
Yeah,
they now
I think people feel that they can more openly speak about them now and in public, and you know, when they're in places they can talk about things like that, that it's more open to talk about. And is
it something you've noticed?
Yeah, I have noticed, like when I've been out and when I've been like socialising or been for like coffee and stuff, of the conversations that people do have to feel they are, you know, able to speak about them types of things more.
Yeah. So you've noticed more racism, I suppose people would call it.
Yeah, that's what I would call it. Yeah, when you hear people speaking, it is racist, but they don't consider it to be because they think they're able to say that now.
Who thinks Britain's a more racist place than a year ago?
Yeah, it seems to be, yes, more explicitly.
It's more explicit, so it's not that the racism is increased, it's that people are open about it.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's Brexit that's actually unleashed it, but I think it's the example that's set us by the political leaders who feel enabled to be able to say things that are really quite outrageous. And it has validated people's thinking and ability to speak out.
Who thinks they've got less in common now with people from other parts of the country?
I could say that I have less in common with some people as close as my own family members that live in the south because of the Brexit, because some of them voted to leave and I didn't.
Who thinks Britain's a more divided place now than a year ago? So all of you, even though you did vote to leave, you still feel it's more divided?
Yeah. Well, let's explore some of those themes in more depth. Are people right to fear that as immigration moves up the political agenda, Britain is becoming more racist? Well, to talk about that, Sunder Katwala is director of British Future, a think tank focused on identity and integration, and now Mehmet is vice chair of Migration Watch UK. Well, first of all, to you, Sunder Katwala, this is fairly depressing, isn't it? Listening to those ladies talk there, I mean, all of them were saying that they thought that there had been an increase in racism. Is this something that you expect to see?
Well, I think it's interesting as well that obviously people who were on both sides of the referendum there were saying that they were worried, whichever side they were on, about this issue of prejudice after the referendum. So clearly people do feel a more divided society. Now, I don't think those divisions have arisen since last June. I think in a way it's illuminated a set of divisions and how people feel about change in our society. And so there are different frustrations about that. Some people feel very concerned because they were on the Remain side of the referendum. They're very worried about what's going to happen. Other people who voted leave probably feel that their vote has been disrespected by other people. So we've got a lot of work to do to come together. In the long run, I think Britain's definitely become less racist in my lifetime. If you go back 30 years to when I was a 10-year-old in the playground, it was much more acceptable to use terms about people that were racist and derogatory, and people debated, was that banter or was that wrong? And I think we decided that was wrong. And I think we've now got to commit to keeping that progress that we've made and making sure it extends to everybody. And that's a question about what was the referendum about. For me, it was a political debate, a difficult decision. Do you want to leave the European Union or do you want to stay within it? That's about our political future. It wasn't a debate about whether we're going back to 1972 or 1975 and reversing 40 or 50 years of cultural and social change in this country.
But that decision, Mehmet, to say that calling people names in the playground was unacceptable has been characterised as political correctness. And there certainly has been a broad discussion about the fact that whenever anybody tried to raise the issue of immigration, they'd veered into unpleasant territory and everybody slammed the door shut. Do you think that allowed resentment to build and build and build? And so therefore we have seen that door now flung open?
I think that there were concerns, as you've rightly pointed out, long before the referendum about the consequences of large-scale migration, net migration, at the sort of scale, on the sort of scale that we're having at the moment. Look, I was a child in the mid-50s going to school as a minority ethnic, a foreigner, and I had names thrown at me then. So it's not anything new to behave in this sort of childish way. By and large, I agree with Sunder.
But have people felt emboldened now, following the vote, to be able to say the words?
More emboldened than they needed to be to express their view and voice their concerns. And it's very important that they should voice their concerns. That was the reason why they voted the way they did. Not because really they had any strong feeling just for immigration, for a whole host of reasons. But immigration was clearly, and the scale of immigration was clearly one of the main factors that prompted them to vote the way they did. Because half the net migration that we're experiencing at the moment is from the EU, and we have no control over it. They were well aware of that, and that's why they were saying, let's do something about that.
So Sunder, I mean, what do you take from that? Do you think he's right that it was the scale of immigration that that we couldn't actually do anything about while we were members, as we still are, of course, of the European Union?
Well, I think we're going to have a debate now about how we want our immigration to change with regard to free movement in the European Union and regard to, obviously, immigration from outside.
And do you think it should
Europe
change?
as
Do you think we do need to change?
I think it is going to change, and I think it should, because I think that reflects what people thought the referendum was about. But where we need very clear political leadership here is making a distinction between a legitimate, important debate about how do we want our immigration policy to change in future, what should the rules be, and what we'll be telling people who want to come to Britain, and what we say to people who've come to Britain, who've made their homes here, from Europe, from Eastern Europe, from Western Europe. There are 3 million people in this country, very anxious about their future in this country, and part of that anxiety is not knowing where they stand with the government, and part of that is that there are, increased numbers of examples of people being told, why are you still here? Why haven't you gone home? And we need very clear political leadership that most people on both sides don't think the referendum was about sending people home. If some people are deluded about that or think that's what it was about, they need to hear, not from the 48% or from the 50%, 52%, but from 90% of us to say it wasn't about that, actually. People who are here are welcome to stay, and then we'll have the debate about the future policy and what changes. That's a political debate we're going to have. If you've come to Britain, you've made your home here, you're welcome to stay, and I think we need a clear commitment from government that that's going to happen, so that actually that removes the basis from people who are going around being prejudiced and racist to people who've made their lives here.
Do you think that's right, Mehmet, that we need to disentangle the strands here? Obviously we're going to be looking at migration policy as part of the general negotiation process, but actually we need to be looking at the people who are here at the moment and ensure that any kind of angst or anger that's happening in the negotiation sphere doesn't bleed out to affect those who are living here and make Britain their home.
Well, to be fair to the Prime Minister, she did make an attempt to have a deal and agree that where we've got people from the EU here and where Brits are in other EU member states, that they should be told, OK, no problem, you can stay, nothing will happen to you. But it was her partners who said, no, we don't want to do a deal on that at the moment. Look, we've got the vast majority of people coming from the EU come here really to go into fairly low-skill work. About 70% of those coming to this country from the EU come here to work.
But they're needed.
80% of those go into very low-skill work or lower-skill work. The 20% who can come here, the doctors, the engineers, and the rest of it, there's no problem with those, and no one is suggesting that no one should be able to come.
But industry and various sectors say they need those large armies of people coming over as well.
That depends. There's only about 5% of the overall workforce that is from the EU. Different sectors perhaps have different needs, but to say we've got to continue with this uncontrolled migration of people coming from the EU simply because a few people, a few employers want to draw on cheap labour, that is not reason for mass migration.
And when we're looking at issues of migration, do you think it is useful, Sunder Katwala, to actually break it up into sectors to see who does need the extra influx of people, and also perhaps maybe areas and regions as well? You know, there's some areas of Britain that may need the influx more than others.
I think there's now a debate about what choices we want to make, and actually in a way it's a chance to have a different kind of debate than the one we have. I think one reason people felt the debate was frustrating is they would say, well, you know, I like skilled immigration, I'm not sure about non-skilled immigration, but they were told, well, you've got no choice because they're the rules of the club. Well, we've now got to decide what the rules are going to be, and that means that people have to think, well, where fruit needs picking, care homes need staff, actually I do want to protect that, but maybe they want some control over what are the numbers, how does that happen? It's not at all, in my view, racist to have that open, important debate about the pace of immigration, the levels of immigration. But I think there's a responsibility on people who want to have that debate and to argue for controls within it, to actually say one of the points of saying that's not racist is that people on both sides of that debate should be calling out the people who are bringing racism and prejudice into that debate, which none of us should want. And I think letting Europeans who are already here stay here and having a very strong consensus on that, as Alp has said, is a very important foundation for the reasonable debate we need to have in the future about future policy, without people feeling fearful because they've come to live in Britain.
Well, some very interesting elements brought up by both men. Thank you very much indeed, Sunder Katwala from British Future and Mehmet from Migration Watch UK. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.